It's time for the Parent Memoirs.
I was just going to say, this is like the second time in a row that we've been able to do it the first time.
Woohoo! We're making progress. We're finally figuring this shit out. A year.
Right? How many years?
Well, a year since we've been doing it on here. Like, good Lord. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So welcome to another episode of the Parent Memoirs. I'm Laura Mack.
I'm Jessica. Nope. Balls. Sorry. I got thrown off by the waffle snatch. I'm Jessica James.
Oh my God. So for those of you who don't know at home, on this little recording program we use to record remotely, you can put in like your screen name basically, and she typed in waffle snatch, which I commented on when we first jumped on here, and then when I just said my name, she can see her own screen name on there, and it threw her off.
Well, it's like, remember the last time, when we did it with you, me, and Tanya, I typed in twat waffle, and you guys were like freaking out. I was like, no, I did it. It's okay.
It's like, oh my God, because I say twat waffle all the time. And I was like, because the system, if you don't put in a name, it will generate one for you. Like, what is it? The gentle astronaut or something. Like, it'll just combine like two random words. So when it said twat waffle, I was like, whoa. Did it actually just assign you that name? That's amazing. No, dumbass. And when I say dumbass, I mean me.
No. Yeah, it's a good question to have asked because you never know.
You never know. All right. So we are actually going to do a deep dive today. And it's a story that I have been obsessing over for about the last 2 weeks. Because Tanya and I didn't get to record. She wasn't feeling good this morning. I'm actually going to put this out as a bonus episode on Q as in Cucumber because we haven't posted anything there for a little bit. It's just been, Tanya hasn't been feeling good. I've been super busy. We just have not gotten that far. Oh my God. So, we are going to do this deep dive today. And I found this story, I'm going to post the sources that I used for it all in the description box. I found this story because I was looking for kind of a deep dive for us to do that had to do with parenting. And I looked at first at the Chris Watts case, and I found this lady on YouTube that I talked to you about that I'm now officially obsessed with.
Yes.
Her name is Bailey Sarian. Love her. I watched her Chris Watts video, and then I watched the documentary on it, and broke me. We're not going to ever do that case.
Is that the guy with the wife and the daughters?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. In Colorado that he killed. It broke me. It really did. Listening to his confession where he coldly talked about how he killed his little girls and what they said to him as he was doing it. It broke me. I was like, nope, I can't for my mental health, and I damn sure know for your mental health. Nope. I was not willing to kill Jessica. And honestly, telling you that story would have killed you.
Oh, well, thank you again for looking out for my sanity.
Good.
Because
God.
I know if you can't handle it, it's not happening for me.
Nope. I will say the one thing about the Chris Watts case that I was like, it's not funny, but it's funny to us, and I don't mean to be disrespectful at all. But what was funny about it was the morning after the murder, or the morning of the murder, her friend who had dropped her off the night before. They'd been at a training thing in Arizona. Their flight had been delayed. She didn't get home till almost 2 a.m. Her friend had dropped her off, and her friend had texted her the next day, and she didn't answer her. And that was not like Shanann, the victim, the mom, at all. Mm-hmm. Like, she lived on her phone. Her business was all on her phone. Like, it was just very unusual. So she went over to the house to check on her, and she knocked on the door. Nobody was answering. She tried to but the husband, the murderer, he ended up getting a text because they had one of those security systems that says, somebody's at the front door. Yeah. And she's texting back and forth and calling him. And he's like, oh, Shanann said she had a play date. And she was like, then why is she not answering her phone? Like, I'm concerned. She looks in the garage. The garage has those like window things at the top. She looks and she sees their only personal car is in the garage. And she can also see that the car has the baby's car seats in it. And she's like, if she went on a play date, she would have, even if somebody else gave her a ride, she would have taken the car seats. Like, right. What the fuck? So she tries to go to the front door again. And she tries to like break in the house. And Chris calls her and is like, get the fuck off my property. And she's like, no, I'm calling the police. And he's like, don't do that. I will be there soon. Hangs up. She calls Shanann's doctor because she was supposed to have a doctor's appointment that morning and somehow cajoles them. I don't know how the fuck she got them to tell her because that feels like a HIPAA thing. But they told her she didn't show up for this doctor's appointment. And she was like, okay, that's it. I'm calling the police. So she called the police. The police show up. Eventually, Chris shows up, lets him in the house. And she's the one that's kind of going around the house. And she's like, oh, my God, here's her purse. Is her medication in her purse? Yep, her medication is in her purse. They found her phone. Like, she's the one who's, like, pushing. And it just made me laugh because I was like, that would be any one of us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
You, me, Carly, Tanya, Sophia, John would do whatever we tell him to do. Like
it would probably be all of us at once.
More than likely. So she just made me laugh because her friend didn't text her back within a few hours. And she was like, I'm at your house. I'm trying to break in your house. I'm calling your doctor's office. I don't give a fuck. Like she just reminded me of all of us and how we would be. Like, just like this morning when Tanya didn't show up to record, it wasn't like her. Next thing you know, I'm texting her kids like, where's Tanya? Is she okay?
Right. Well, I know. I mean, and you do that with me too, because sometimes I'm a dork and I don't see messages until like the next day, and you're like, what is going on? Are you okay? And I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm just being stupid.
God help any of our husbands if they ever do anything to us, because the rest of us are going to hunt them down. Like, we'll figure it out. You're not going to get away with it because
nope,
we're on the case.
Right? I thought things through.
She was funny. She just reminded me of us and like all of us in our friendships. Like, no.
Well, I'm glad that she had a friend like that, but it's unfortunate that, that she had to go through that.
Yeah, it's just tragic. That whole story is tragic. But not to say this story isn't, but okay. So Bailey Sarian talked about this, and the video is highly there's something it's called Murder, Mystery, and Makeup Mondays, and she tells a true crime story while she does her makeup, and there's something oddly hypnotic about it, like watching this woman do her makeup while she's telling you these horrible stories. I don't know why.
Maybe it's supposed to be like calming, one of those like things that are supposed to help ease people.
Maybe so, because honestly, it really does. And she even says it in some of the videos. This shouldn't work, but for some reason it does. I don't know why. Like,
maybe it's a distraction. Really, I don't know.
Maybe, yeah. But so I watched the video she did about it. There's also like an hour-long, like kind of like a Dateline special that was done by this Australian news channel. And the book, I eventually got the book, and you know me, I typically only do audiobooks, but there wasn't an audiobook. So I actually read the physical book, which is very unusual for me.
Yes.
But the book I do want to reference because it was written by the reporters, the investigative journalists who did the like Dateline type story. And they're kind of the ones that really got attention on it again. Mm-hmm. Because it had been about 30 years since all this happened.
Okay, so this is an old story.
It's an old story that just wrapped up last year.
Oh, that's crazy.
So it's either the longest or one of the longest criminal cases in the history of Australia.
Okay.
So the book is called The Family Court Murders: 4 Murders, 5 Bombings, No Convictions by Debbie Marshall. It's a solid true crime book. And even in the Bailey Sarian video, there's times where throughout it, she's like, she must have said the cycle repeats at least 6 times. And she said it a few times, like, this is exhausting. Like, you just can't believe how long it went on. And they knew almost immediately who it was. They knew. It wasn't like this elusive serial killer that nobody could identify. Like, they knew who he was. Yeah. They couldn't do anything, which made it worse somehow.
Right.
Somehow made it worse. So, the backdrop of this story, we'll start off with kind of the history of divorce in Australia. Okay. So, prior to 1959, you could get a divorce in Australia, but it was all of the rules for divorce were handled at the state level, basically. And there were different rules all over the place. It wasn't a uniform system. And there were also different rules, even within the state, for men and women, of course. Okay. Yeah. So you had to have a reason for getting a divorce. And if you were a man and you said, my wife cheated on me, like, the wife would be found, quote unquote, at fault, and the husband would get everything, right? Okay. But if a woman came in and said a man cheated on her, she kind of had to prove that she didn't do anything to drive him to cheat. Okay. I know.
That's stupid.
Trust me. This gets worse. It gets worse.
Okay.
So, but once again, this is all at the state level. In 1959 and enacted in 1961, they tried to centralize the system. And this is going to sound strange to us, but keep in mind, this is Australia. Now, in order to get a divorce, you could get a divorce for things like adultery, desertion, insanity, cruelty, things like that. But you had to prove it, number one. And number two, you had to go in front of the Supreme Court of Australia.
Okay.
So imagine Ruth Bader Ginsburg asking about, like, a fucking divorce. Like, it just sounds... I don't know if their Supreme Court was the same as our Supreme Court, but it sounded really funny to me. Like
yeah, seems a little unnecessary.
A little bit. Plus, it was expensive. Right. Plus, it was expensive because you also had to prove it. If your spouse was cheating, you had to hire a PI to follow them and, like, get pictures and shit. Plus, everything had to be done out in public. So it was embarrassing. As, like, even if you did have the time and money, did you really want to, you know, have your dirty laundry aired for the whole, you know, country to see? And it was embarrassing. And people would come to, like, watch the show. And lawyers would just get, like, they would go for the fucking jugular in court. Like, they didn't care. They would, like, make a big show of it. And it was a hot mess. It was a hot mess. One of the bases for divorce was cruelty, as well as, you know, adultery, et cetera, et cetera. Cruelty basically was their terminology for domestic violence. But you had to prove it. So one woman came in and she was accusing her husband of beating her. And she was, like, covered in bruises, and it was obvious. But the judge was like, well, do you have records of the broken bones? And she was like, no. And he, like stood up and yelled at her, like, where are the broken bones? You can't have cruelty without broken bones. Like,
what?
Yeah. That kind of shit.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Like,
yeah.
She was just like, okay, so he's got, like, so he can hit me, but just not too hard. Like,
that's horrible.
So what you're saying is, like, And I can't even imagine, like, if your husband was standing right there and he was, like, nervous that he was going to get in trouble for actually hitting you. And then all of a sudden they were like, you heard a judge say that. You could just see him being like, oh, cool.
Right? Yeah.
So don't hit her any harder than I've been hitting her. Like,
right.
Okay.
God, that's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah.
Can't even imagine what, that day was like afterwards, after court for that lady.
I know, right? That always makes me horrified sometimes where I'm like, what happened after they left? Like,
right?
Oh,
yeah.
No, that did not end well. One woman, this lady cracked me the fuck up. She knew she'd been, I think the thought process was she knew that her husband could prove that she'd been cheating. So instead of denying it, it seems like she just wanted to embarrass him. So her lawyer, I just want to stress that, her lawyer hands a list to the judge of all of the men that she cheated on her husband with. And the judge says, is this list accurate? And she goes, no. And he's like, oh, well, what's wrong with the list? And she's like, oh, there were a lot more men than that. It's like, oh, damn. She didn't give a fuck. So this was just a hot mess. So in 1974, I believe, or 1976, can't remember which one, and I'm not seeing it in my notes here. Yeah, the Family Law Act of 1976. It allowed that the federal government could hear divorce cases in a special court that they created called the Family Court. And no longer did it have to be in public. No longer did there need to be fault assigned. Everything could be like, we're just getting divorced for whatever reason, and we're going to split custody and assets and all that good stuff. It established a free counseling service to help mediate these negotiations. And it was to be called the helping court. Like, they had very lofty intentions with this court. Mm-hmm. But the early days of this court were a hot mess because, yes, the goal of the no-fault divorce, while it's a good idea, and yes, it probably is necessary, the problem with it was, at this point, now you had a bunch of, especially men, pissed off that their quote-unquote, bitch of an ex-wife gets to take half of their money, and they've got no recourse for it. Now, no fault means you just divide and move on, right?
Go your way. Yeah.
Now, like I said, this pissed off a bunch of men, and these men's advocacy groups started coming up, like being created to defend these guys. And I in some cases, I do feel bad for them. Even the court itself would acknowledge years later that they did favor the women, especially in cases of custody, because they did feel at the time like the traditional caretaker role of a woman was more important than the man's. So they tended to favor these women. So these men are going, wait, she gets to take half my money and my kids? And they would get visitation. So, but of course they took it too fucking far. One dude said something to the effect of, she wants to eat half of my meal because she had the privilege of making it for me. First of all, it's not a privilege to cook for your ass. Fuck off.
Wow.
It's just a dick thing to say.
Right?
It's just ridiculous. So, security was bad in the court. There were fights breaking out. Women would show up to get restraining orders, and abusive husbands would show up, and next thing you know, there were fights. And I mean, it was a bit of a mess. And the informality of the court also didn't seem to help, especially with the men, because the judges didn't wear robes or anything. So because of that, there seemed to be this kind of lack of decorum. They really wouldn't give a shit that you were the judge. You looked and were dressed just like them, and they felt a lot more comfortable just kind of being like, fuck you, to the judge.
Right.
It didn't help. So this is kind of the backdrop of this whole story, this family court thing. So that brings us to the two main people in this story. Leonard Warwick and Andrea Blanchard. Okay. Leonard was born around 1945. His parents were Leonard, but his name was also Leonard, but it was spelled differently, which I thought was odd.
Huh.
The main guy, Leonard, is Leonard, and his father's name is Lennard. I don't know why. It's a little strange. But for some reason, they gave him the same name, different spelling. About 13 months later, his little sister, Eileen, was born. His mother's name is also Eileen. So they've got Leonard, Eileen, and Eileen. Right?
Okay.
Now, sadly, when Leonard was 6, his mother passed away very suddenly. It seems like some sort of cerebral, like a blood, it sounds like a blood clot. She had some sort of blood disease that was very, very fatal. It had like a 90% fatality rate. Okay. And she passed away very quickly. So Leonard was 6 and Eileen was 5. Now, this was also a time in Australia where the economy wasn't doing that great and they were rather poor. And this would lead later, which I get this. My grandfather was raised during the Depression and he was a hoarder. He would save everything because you never know when you could use it.
Right.
So it seemed like Leonard had that same like pinching pennies thing from when he was a kid.
Sure.
So to ease the financial burden on their father, Eileen was sent to live with an aunt and Leonard stayed with the father.
Okay.
And when he was 15, eventually he left school. He went to work on a mushroom farm for a while. And then he was drafted in the 60s during the Vietnam War. Now, he was pissed. He was not happy about this at all. Absolutely livid. And this really seemed to, for me, kind of kick off this, like, hatred isn't even a strong enough word, but hatred of authority. Like,
okay,
to the point of like, dude, calm down. Like, just take it down. Just a smidge. Okay? Just a skosh.
Right.
It's not that bad. But he was pissed, right? Now, he wasn't posted out of the country. He never left Australia. And for his whole military career, it seems like he was a cook. And 3 years later, and I'm not saying anything. Army got to eat too. Like, that's an important job. Okay.
Right.
But it is important later on that all he did in the military was he was a cook.
Okay.
3 years later, he was discharged and eventually he became a firefighter.
Okay.
Now that brings us to Andrea Blanchard, his soon-to-be wife. She was born around 1950. I couldn't find their exact birthdays, but she was born to her father, Leslie, and her mother, Marjorie. Fuck Marjorie.
Okay.
Just a malignant, narcissistic bitch. Now, you're going to relate to this family a little bit because they had Loretta, the oldest girl, Judy, the middle girl, Andrea, the baby girl, and then they finally got their boy, Stephen.
Nice.
They finally got their little boy. That's awesome. he was as the baby boy, he was absolutely just doted on and spoiled by his sisters and like, yeah. But Marjorie was just this complete narcissist. I won't tell too many stories about her because honestly, they really upset me. It wasn't like physical abuse. It was just, she was a slut.
Okay.
She would openly cheat on their father. Every night she would get dressed to the nines and leave the house and go meet up with her current lover, a lot of times a married man. She would disappear for days, weeks, sometimes years, and Leslie just waited for her. He was just this hardworking, simple, life-loving dude that just loved her. And, yeah.
That's sad. Poor guy.
Yeah. Now, eventually, Loretta, the oldest girl, she gets married and leaves. And it seems like she was just like, I just need out of this. Like, I don't want to I don't want to take care of these kids. Like, fuck this. So she leaves. Judy, now the oldest girl, she steps in and really it becomes the primary caretaker for Andrea and Stephen.
Okay.
Now, Andrea and Leonard were set up on a blind date in 1970. She was 18 and he was, like I said, about 5 years older. And according to her, it was just like, it was love at first sight. Just absolutely fell in love super quick. About 4 years later, in October of 1974, they get married. They didn't take a honeymoon. They stayed the night at a local motel, and the next day they moved into their new home that they had like been scrimping and saving and pinching their pennies for the last few years to purchase.
Okay.
And it was kind of out there a little bit in the boonies. The way that they describe it in the book is that this house would become Leonard's fortress and Andrea's prison.
Oh, okay.
Because soon after the wedding, he became violently abusive. And he was always very like possessive in the relationship, but it got worse. Like, she wasn't allowed to see her friends, her family. She would be locked in the house. Like, you had to have the keys to get out of the house.
Wow.
He would just walk in the house having a bad day and just start beating the crap out of her. Like, her family showed up on her birthday with a cake and he refused to let them in the house. Would just show up at her job just to check up on her.
Right.
And eventually she left him. She screwed up the nerve and she left and she went to her father's house. Now, Leonard wasn't too happy about this. And he basically stalked her to get her to come back. And eventually threatened her father, who she adored, and was like, I could kill your father at any time, basically, if you don't come back to me. I'm going to actually put a link to some resources for victims of domestic violence as well in the description of this episode, because, and I don't want to see one fucking comment about, well, why did she go back? Fuck you. If you've not been in her shoes, if you haven't been in an abusive relationship, you don't know. Like,
right.
I feel bad, especially her decisions later. If I see one fucking comment criticizing her, I will flip the fuck out. Like, I will freak out. Okay. So she goes back and she finds out that she's pregnant a little bit later. And even during her pregnancy, like, he did something to her during her pregnancy that I was like, oh, sir, how dare you? One day she was 7 months pregnant. They were at a mall or some sort of like shopping center or something. And her and Leonard ran into her sister and her husband. And she stopped for like 10 seconds. It was just a sheer coincidence. She stopped for like 10 seconds just to say hi to them. And when she turned around, Leonard left. He took the car and went home. Stranded her. She's 7 months pregnant. She had to scrounge around in her purse to find change for the bus. She rides this bus all over town until finally it gets close enough to her house that she gets off, but has to still walk a good distance to get home. Once again, 7 months pregnant. Finally gets to the house, but he wouldn't let her have keys to the house. And he locked her out and refused to let her in the house. All because she said hi to her sister in passing.
Right.
So finally she tells it, she's like, you open this fucking door or I'm going to scream the walls down. Like, so he opened the door, pulled her in the house, and beat the fucking shit out of her. She eventually gives birth to Trudie, little Trudie, on June 22nd of 1978. And the abuse continues. Eventually one night, it gets really, really bad. And she manages to snatch the keys while Leonard is out of the room, unlocks, because once again, she's locked in the house.
Right.
She can't take Trudie with her because he fucked up her arms so badly she can't lift her. But she manages to get out of the house, runs to like one of those like emergency call boxes that you see on the side of the road. Yeah. Calls her sister. Sister comes to get her. Eventually they get Trudie and she files for divorce.
Okay.
So this is 1979 when they file for divorce. And she seeks full custody of Trudie. And when Leonard finds this out, he pretty much loses his shit and tells her that he's going to get Trudie at all costs. Like, nothing and no one is going to get in his way. Right?
Okay.
So the interim order that the court issues in the family court that she gets full custody for now. It's a temporary order just while they're working shit out, right?
Yeah.
But Leonard can stay living in the home, but she gets Trudie, right? But Leonard had visitation like twice a week. Okay, fine. And the judge also says that Leonard has to abide by the terms of a restraining order that Andrea had taken out against him. The first judge's name is Justice David Opus, and we'll get back to him. Leonard doesn't follow the rules at all.
Of course.
Despite having all these, of course, exactly. Despite having all these rules for Andrea when she was there, like, he would just show up at Trudie's school whenever the fuck he wanted and just take her. Just take her. He would keep her well past the time that he was supposed to return her. It was a mess. And there was a point where there was a day he was supposed to bring her back. She didn't have her own car, so she couldn't just drive over and get her, but he wasn't bringing her back and he wasn't answering the phone. So she freaks out. She's getting truly, truly worried. So she calls her little brother, Stephen. Now, at this point, Stephen is a grown-up. He's 25. And by all accounts, he's just an absolute sweetheart. He's just a, hippie, surfer-loving dude. Like, very go with the flow, sweet, funny, charming. Just a nice kid. She calls Stephen. It's like, can you take me over to Leonard's so we can get Trudie? And he's like, absolutely. Takes her over there. He tries to mediate the situation. He goes up to the door. Leonard is this asshole that if he opened the door and you were standing there, or if he answered the phone when you called, he wouldn't say anything. He would just wait for you to respond. I did you a favor by picking up the phone.
Right.
You can speak first. God, he's
right.
I'm telling you, by the time I was done watching Bailey Sarian's video, I will never hear the name Leonard again without thinking fucking Leonard. You will never hear the name Leonard again and not say fucking Leonard.
Right.
Ugh. So fucking Leonard opens the door and Stephen is like, look, we just want the baby. We're not here to cause trouble. And he tells him the court isn't going to really look favorably on you if your goal is to get her back. If you're already not following the rules, that's not going to help you. Just give the baby back. He just slams the door in their face. So Andrea ends up having to alert the family court that he's not giving Trudie back. And it takes a few days, but eventually they get her back. Now, if somebody out there has an explanation for this case. Now, there's a lot of stuff recently that's been written about this case, but there's a good chunk of time where nothing was said about it. Honestly, because everybody was so fucking terrified of this guy, of Leonard. He was a terrifying human being, and everybody involved was petrified of him. And the fact that they knew it was him and he got away with it made them even more scared. They're clearly he can murder people and get away with it. Because trust me, he does for a while, right? But for some reason, all of the sources that I read kept saying that it was true. They were celebrating Trudie's second birthday, but this happened on February 22nd. And her birthday is June 22nd. So I don't know why they kept saying, they were celebrating her second birthday. I'm like, her unbirthday? Her 6-month birthday? What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Very confused. But, okay, fine. So on the 21st, Stephen had gotten off work, went and saw his girlfriend, eventually got home super late at night. Was always quiet when he came in the house super late because Trudie adored him. She was his little shadow. Uncle Stevie. And if Andrea woke up, Trudie was going to wake up, and then Trudie would want to spend time with him. So he was always just very, very quiet. He comes into the house and goes to sleep. The next morning, Andrea wakes up. She checks in his room. He's not there. She thinks, he probably just stayed over at his girlfriend's house, because this house, Stephen is living there, Andrea and Trudie are living there, and Leslie, their father, is living there. They all live together. Now, Leslie was out of town on holiday at this point.
Okay.
So she checks on Stephen. He's not there. She doesn't really think too much about it. A little bit later that day, though, his work calls and says, Stephen didn't show up for work. And that's very unlike him. So she was like, uh-oh, something's wrong. So she goes to look in his room, and she notices that his wallet is sitting there. And she's like, uh-oh, something is wrong.
Right.
So she calls the police. They file a missing persons case. And for like a week, everybody is looking for Stephen, and nobody knows where he is. The police find a little bit of like blood spatter on the wall behind the bed.
Okay.
And they also notice that his blankets are missing. And they're like, okay, what happened? But there's such a little amount of blood that they're thinking maybe he's just okay somewhere. Like,
right.
We don't know. Now, about a week later, a couple of friends are boating at a place called Jerusalem Bay at Cowan Creek. And they see what they think is a mannequin or a dummy floating in the water. And it turns out it was a real body. And unfortunately, it was Stephen.
It's Stephen. Yeah.
Yeah. He'd been shot in the head. And they think that how the killer kept the blood from like making a big giant fucking mess was he was found with like a plastic bag wrapped around his head. And they think whoever shot him used a silencer.
Yeah.
So they shot him with a silencer, immediately wrapped his head up to contain the mess, wrapped him up in his blankets, and carried him out of the house. Now, whoever had dumped the body had tied a rope around his neck along with a house brick, which apparently, I was like, they kept saying a house brick, not a brick. So I looked up what that is in Australia, and apparently it's a big ass brick. It's way heavier than what we would think of. Like, it looked way bigger. I was like, okay.
Right, because you say house brick, I think of like a little red rectangle brick.
No, we're talking the brick that they were, it looked pretty big. Apparently the cops carrying these bricks like into the police station, like just carrying one at a time, they were getting winded. So I was like, this is a heavy ass brick. So he had one rope tied around his neck with a brick attached to it, and then another rope tied around his waist with like 10 or 11 bricks tied to it. Damn. And whoever had dumped him in the water clearly seemed to think that the bricks would be heavy enough to keep him down and that he would never be found. What they didn't take into account was that the body fills up with gases and it forced him to the surface. Like, they didn't... I know this sounds awful, but one of the sources, I can't remember which one, said, like, they failed to cut open his stomach, which would have prevented that. I was like, yeah, how stupid can you be? Doesn't everybody know that? Like,
now I do. I did it before.
Apparently. Like, all right. So he floated to the surface. He also had been attacked by what they believed to be a bull shark in the area that had also destroyed some of the physical evidence. Like, he'd been in there a week at this point. Like, a lot of, sea creatures are, doing their thing. And so the family is just completely devastated. This is their baby boy. This is the baby of the family. And it's the only boy. And just everybody is just beyond upset. Now, Andrea tells police, like, this was Leonard. Like, he needed the boy out of the... Like, he threatened my dad, but my dad is an old man. This is a young man that lives in this house that probably could have protected us. Plus, Leonard was this person that clearly just... Any sort of thing that he considered to be disrespectful to him, he took deeply personally. So this dude showing up and knocking on his door and being like, hey, hello.
Right.
He felt disrespected. So Andrea was like, it's fucking Leonard. Like, I don't know what to tell you. But when they look at the body, they do notice something interesting. That this rope that was tied around his neck and his waist was a special rope. That was this orange nylon rope that's only issued to the official firefighters in Australia.
Ah, interesting.
Leonard is a firefighter.
Right.
And their other question was, how did somebody do this and get him out of the house so quietly? Well, think about a firefighter. They got to be strong enough to throw somebody over their shoulder and haul ass out of a house or a fire. Like,
right.
It's not that unreasonable, but this is all, they can't prove it's Leonard's rope, right? It's tied to him because he's a firefighter, but there's a lot of firefighters.
Right.
So they search his house. The only thing they find is a piece of paper with the word rope written on it in his handwriting. But that's it. It's not enough. Like, they just, they check his time card at work, but he had no alibi. Now, whenever Leonard is brought in to be questioned, he does what they call petition their right to silence, which sounds like our Fifth Amendment. Like,
yeah.
Not saying shit. Refuse to answer any questions. Even questions as simple as, do you work as a fireman? He's like, not answering that. He refused to answer anything. And they were like, okay, this is weird. But they don't have anything. So the investigation kind of chugs along from there. Now, something very key about this whole case that makes it, at this time in the law in Australia, you could not charge somebody with a crime based on circumstantial evidence. You had to have physical proof, a witness, a videotape, a picture, something. And they just didn't have it. And I've since found out that you could have charged somebody with circumstantial evidence, but the circumstantial evidence had to be such that it eliminated the possibility that it could be anybody else. Once again, there's a lot of firefighters. Like, who could it be?
Yeah.
Like, they don't know. They know, they're pretty sure it's him, but they don't have anything. They also interview Leonard's father, who says that he hasn't been here in years. They take a look around, but they don't have a warrant. They do see that he has a .22 caliber pistol, which is the caliber of gun that shot Stephen. He lets them take it so they can do tests, but that's about all they can do. And the bullet had been in the water, so it was a little bit damaged, and it was a mess. So in the next few months, Andrea and Leonard would continue to appear in front of the family court, trying to work out the details of the divorce. And they continued to appear in front of Justice Opus. Now, a little bit on Justice Opus. He was a very fiery person on the bench. He kept people in check. He had no problem putting assholes in their place. Like, he had no tolerance for bullshit. But by all accounts, he was just an absolutely lovely, lovely man, lovely father. He became a lawyer in 1963 when he was admitted to the bar. He focused on criminal and family matters. He met his wife, Kristen, when she worked in the pharmacy in the same center as his law firm. David's secretary had organized a work party, and she asked him, like, is there anybody in particular you want me to invite? And he was like, I want you to invite the girl who works at the pharmacy over here, right? Mm-hmm. And she just thought, like, he was this small, quiet, as she described him, this small, quiet Jewish man that she thought was nice, but she didn't really think about him as, like, a partner. But at this party, like, they just hit it off. Like, she thought he was, quote, a delightful, gracious, and sensitive man with a fine intellect and a zany sense of humor, and also a free thinker who loves beautiful clothes, music, and reading. She liked that despite being a barrister, like a lawyer, and that he was, and that he was wealthy, he still treated anyone he met, no matter their social standing, with the same polite courtesies. Like, it's that kind of, it's that old saying, like, a person who's not nice to the waiter isn't a nice person. Like, he was a nice person. They got married in 1970. They had 2 kids, Josh and Persia. Now, he was concerned about the atmosphere in the court being so kind of lax, because people would get super, like, pissy with him. And he wouldn't tell Kristen, like, details or names, but he did tell Kristen once that a man had threatened to, quote unquote, get him in court. Now, since the preliminary orders that Opus had issued at the end of 1979 and the beginning of 1980, Leonard had been pissing Judge Opus off, or Justice Opus off, more and more and more. Like, he would keep Trudie. He wasn't abiding by the restraining order. He just wouldn't show up at court. He just wouldn't show up. Opus would try to give him another chance and push it out a little bit. He refused to give Andrea her cot. I put that in quotation marks. I think that's what they call a crib.
Oh, okay.
And the progress report from the counselor from the little counseling center was not kind about Leonard. She pretty much was like, he's a dick. Like, this man is a dick. Like, so Opus had just about enough of his bullshit. So to punish Leonard, he actually stopped Leonard's visitation with Trudie. He was just like, get your shit together, or you can't see your daughter at all. That was in April. It looks like in May, I believe. He'd gotten his shit together a little bit, so Opus had kind of given him a little bit of his visitation back and had set their next court date for June 30th. After court, Leonard supposedly told Andrea, you're not going to have to worry about Judge Opus for long. And she was like, why? Is he going on holiday? Like, she didn't know.
Right.
And he's like, no, he just won't be there at, quote unquote, he won't be there at all. And she was like, don't know what that means, but okay. So on June 6th, so just a few weeks after their last court appointment and a few weeks until their next one, Opus gets home from work around 7. He's dropped off by his driver. He goes through the courtyard gate that has like brick walls and shrubbery kind of blocking the front door directly, the view into the house directly. He goes into the house. His wife is making dinner. He dances with his daughter Persia, who is 6 at the time, while his wife is getting things ready. His son Josh is 8. They sit down for dinner and the doorbell rings. So he groans, but he starts to get up, and his son is like, oh, just ignore it. Eat your tea. Which I thought eat your tea was kind of, I was like, okay, that's kind of cute. And he says, no, it's fine. I'll just get the door real quick. As he's walking to the door, the neighbor's fire alarm starts going off, and it's super loud, like unbelievably loud. He goes to the front door, goes out to the gate, opens the gate, and somebody shoots him right in the abdomen, like just shoots him. They don't hear the shot because of the fire alarm, right?
Right.
So Kristen, after a while, she realizes David isn't coming back, and she's like, what's going on? So she goes to check on him and finds him unresponsive. She calls for help. Unfortunately, nearby, there had been a bomb explosion, and it tied up local, like, ambulatory services, and they didn't get there for a while. And unfortunately, David passed. The bullet had punctured his liver and aorta, and he just didn't make it. Mm-hmm. They pretty much concluded that the bomb seemed to be purposeful, like a purposeful way to keep emergency services from getting to him. Yeah. Like, so between the bomb, the fire alarm, to distract from the gunshot and all that stuff, like, it was designed to ensure that he died. And not only that he died, here was the thing that kind of creeped me out about that. Not only that he died, but that he died slowly.
Yeah.
If that makes, like with Stephen, he shot him in the head and it was boom, done. He could have absolutely done the same thing with David Opus.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he chose to shoot him in the stomach or in the chest, right?
Yeah.
And it just, for me, I was like, that's extra creepy. Like.
Right. Well, yeah. Because that way he just bled out slowly while he laid there while everybody else was tied up dealing with bombs and stuff.
Exactly. Like, it just, it added to, like, it was a way to ensure that he died, but also to ensure that he suffered. And that was like.
Right.
Ooh.
Right. That was thought out.
Yeah, I know. You can't say that was a coincidence. Like, and Kristen is beyond devastated. Like, it's her husband and her kids saw this. Like, just how awful. And what made it worse was the police initially focused on her. They're like, how was your marriage? And she was like, fuck you. Like,
right?
Oh my God. Yeah. She gets little to no support, either personally or professionally, from the court. She is horrified by the media coverage. These reporters, like, in her face, shoving these cards at her, like, with their information, with handwritten notes. Like, I know this is a difficult time, but call me for an exclusive interview. And she's like,
fuck you.
Fuck off. Right? This is my family tragedy. And you think I'm going to go the fuck away. She's very dignified in front of the press and in public. She holds her head high. But most of David's colleagues avoid her, like... And she's livid that anyone would think that she did this. And eventually she takes her... She's terrified that this person is going to come back, whoever this was.
Right.
And she's extremely protective of her children, as any of us would be.
Right.
She eventually leaves Sydney, never to come back, like, to live. She would come back later when they named a library after David. She would come back for court appearances, but yeah.
Yeah.
Just destroyed her. Ugh, it's just awful. The police slowly start to realize, though, that they're barking up the wrong tree with Kristen, and they focus on the court and his role in the court. But the issue is, this is a place where there are a lot of pissed off people, especially a lot of pissed off men. So narrowing down, like, a suspect list is difficult as hell, because there's a lot of pissed off people. So they start kind of working. I think they said they did over like 1,500 interviews. And they're like slowly
That's crazy.
crossing names off the list. Yeah, exactly. They're slowly starting to cross names off the list, but they get to Leonard, and when he comes in for his interview, immediately asks for a lawyer. And he's the only one that did that. And they were like, do you need a lawyer? Like, we just need an alibi to cross you off the list. And he maintains his right to silence, refuses to say anything. They do another search on his property, but they don't find anything. Again, they know that he was the subject of, like, the investigation into Stephen Blanchard's death, and Opus was killed also by a .22. But that's the only thing that kind of connects them. Now, there were witnesses that saw a man fitting his description running away, but it was dark, and they didn't know it was him in particular. Like, they just didn't have anything.
I would assume that they would have been able to get ballistics off the shooting for that one, since, I mean...
I didn't quite understand the ballistics, but what it sounds to me is like they never really found the gun. They found similar guns, but not the gun. But maybe they just didn't... I don't know if they just didn't have the technology at the time. I don't know.
Maybe. This is one shiesty-ass mofo.
Oh, it gets worse. He gets ballsy. He gets ballsy, dude. Ballsy as fuck. So when in the search of his home, though, at this point they're really suspicious of him,
right?
But he won't talk. So they figure when they search his home, let's just find something, anything we can arrest him on, so we can get his fingerprints and hopefully maybe get him to confess.
Yeah. They
find government-issued toilet paper that was stolen from his job as a fireman. So they arrest him.
Okay. For toilet paper?
For toilet paper.
Stolen toilet... Okay. You know what? They were desperate, so by all means.
They got Al Capone with taxes. They got Len Warwick with toilet paper. Like...
I'd rather go down for taxes than toilet paper, though, right?
It's kind of embarrassing.
Right?
Like, really?
What are you in for?
You cheap bastard.
Stole some toilet paper, right?
Couldn't have afforded some toilet paper? How hard are your shits that you needed government-issued toilet paper, sir? Like, good Lord.
Right?
But that plan doesn't really go anywhere. They get his fingerprints, but they don't have anything to really compare it to. Like, there's nothing... Like, Stephen was in the water. He didn't touch anything in the house, like, where he shot, Opus. So it was like, okay, now what? So a new justice is assigned to the case, and his name is... Hey, Parent Peeps. Thanks for checking out part 1 of our Australian Family Court Attacks Deep Dive. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes or on your favorite podcasting platform so you don't miss the conclusion of this bonkers story. Stay strong, mommies and daddies. Love your faces.